Assalamu alaikum. It's going to be hard to follow the Sheikh with all the warnings he just gave us, but we'll do our best, inshallah. So my name is Seha Islam. As first of all, thank you to the brothers that organized this event, and it's an honor to be here, really, and to speak with you about some of the questions I've been having, where I don't yet have the answers, but I think we need to start thinking about, especially as Brother Haris Irfan also suggested earlier, when Bitcoin itself appreciates so much, there's very little incentive to let go of that Bitcoin and invest in productive enterprises. But of course, part of the equation here is we need to invest in productive enterprises, because if we all just hoarded money, we wouldn't have anything to eat, and we wouldn't be able to advance civilization, which is what we're saying the promise of Bitcoin is. So I sent in the Telegram chat some of the slides that I'll be using, but I'll just speak to them. And I think, let me just see here. I'll start with maybe acknowledging some of the positive developments. So as the Sheikh also alluded to earlier, we have some wins, right? One of the biggest wins is the world itself is moving towards sound money. That's evident in the price appreciation of Bitcoin. That's evident in the price appreciation of gold. That's evident in the fact that central banks have been, for 15 years now, stockpiling gold, where Bitcoin is too small for them to do so. And it's evident in the fact that the United States has announced a strategic Bitcoin reserve, even though they are the reserve currency of the world. So let's take those wins and keep that in mind. Another win I think that we need to take is, Abdullah earlier spoke to fractional reserve banking and the problems that that causes. We should also acknowledge that the world is moving to sound banking, meaning fully reserved banking. And we see that in Bitcoin because we have the Lightning Network, we have the Liquid Network, we have things like electronic cash, but we're also seeing it in US dollars, in some of the stablecoin developments that are happening. Those are basically full reserve banks. Stablecoins are not allowed to fractionalize the dollars that you give to them, unlike traditional banks are. So the United States Senate and House are now announcing that we will have that type of full reserve banking. I think I had too much coffee this morning, so I've got a little bit of the nerves, but hopefully it'll go away. So where I want to go from here is, we have sound money, we're moving to sound money. The world is moving to sound banking, but that's not enough. We also need sound capital markets. We need a way to invest in companies that are more sound than they are today, based on Riba and based on interest-based loans. And we need to figure out a way to do it in a Bitcoin world where we have all these challenges, and it makes a lot of sense to just hold on to your Bitcoin. Maybe a little bit about the justification. So Saifuddin Ammous, in his Principles of Economics, in the capital markets section, he speaks about, I think, the idea originally credited to Mises, which is that you can't really be an advanced capitalist economy unless you have a stock market where you can trade capital, right? Because what that implies is, everything in the example Abdullah gave in the morning with the grocery delivery to his house, the car that it took, the supermarket that it took, the app development that it took, was all done using capital. And we had to layer these investments on top of each other to come up with a solution where Abdullah can spend time with his 5 kids and others can sort of provide services that he can pay for, which wouldn't be possible without capital markets and all of the capital that went into it. So capital is basically the tools that we need to produce the things that we consume. And we need to invest in those tools to then be able to have a better life and advance civilization. Oh, so this is where I have the biggest questions, and especially with the sheikh here, I don't have the answers. But we need to think about what is the risk-free rate for us with Muslims on a Bitcoin standard. What is our risk-free rate? Well, I think our risk-free rate is at best negative 2.5%, because if we do nothing with our money, we will be giving the zakat on it, and that zakat will compound over time, where if you work out the math, in about 10 years, you lose 25%, lose in terms of the nominal amount. So when we think about what is risk-free for us, well, if you don't pay zakat, you're at risk. That I think is known. But what is risk-free for us is a nominal negative return. And we're kind of fixated on nominal positive returns because we grew up in a fiat world. But we need to stop doing that and think about what is the real return. So take a hypothetical. If we could all give up half of our wealth and all of us would be able to afford twice of everything, is that a worthwhile investment? Well, I think it is, because nominally I have less money and less Bitcoin, but I can do, twice the things I used to be able to do. And not only that, the rest of the world can do twice the things it used to be able to do. So that's actually a sound investment. And we're not used to thinking of investments in that way, because we're used to, wanting to see the number go up. But when we have Bitcoin, the number may go down, and we need to start measuring the returns with some tools that we don't yet have, and when we need to come up with them. So I don't know what those are, but I think these are the questions that we need to be sort of thinking about. And in the short term, I'm sympathetic to, I think there was, Harris Irfan mentioned it, and also Marty Bett mentioned it in one of the live streams I was watching. I'm sympathetic to Bitcoin as the hurdle rate, because Bitcoin has not yet been fully adopted, right? And until that happens, I think the best way to get involved in Bitcoin capital markets is probably through building out the infrastructure for Bitcoin, which I think, Coinbits is a great example of. Running your own Lightning node is another great example that's kind of low initial investment that you can do on your own, and a number of other things. But as time progresses and we reach the level of adoption, then we're going to need these new tools and new ways of thinking about how to do investments that we don't yet have. And I think that's what I'm going to be thinking about for the next few years, and trying to figure out how that can be done. And I'm sure a lot of others will be as well. And hopefully we'll be able to come up with some ways of how we should structure those markets. So I think to recap, what should we do now? Well, learn about Bitcoin. If you haven't yet learned about it, even before buying it, there are a lot of good books here. Read those books. After you do that, stay productive, save in Bitcoin. And that's the key to kind of enable all of this. And after you've done some of that, teach others, and maybe start thinking about how you can improve the Bitcoin infrastructure. And if you have the means and the risk tolerance to do so, invest some of that into expanding the Bitcoin infrastructure. And then over time, I think our goal needs to be putting away the nominal returns and thinking about advancing civilization and ways to measure that, as opposed to how much Bitcoin is in our wallets. Thank you. I can take questions if anyone has questions.
Being negative 2.5%. I don't know what that means, but I think what you're saying is like we're spending 2.5% on zakat. So for us, a good investment is something that would return 2.5% or something.
Well, so what I'm trying to get to there is, in the fiat world, there's something called the risk-free rate. I use it in quotes in the slides. I don't think anything is risk-free. There's always some risk of something going wrong. But if we take the equivalent of that concept. In the fiat world, you buy U.S. Treasuries, you get 4.5%, whatever it is. That's your risk-free rate. So wherever else you invest your money has to beat 4.5%. And then in a, let's say, secular Bitcoin sense, people view it as zero is my risk-free rate. In reality, I don't think so, because self-custody has costs. You have to secure it. You have to learn, different things. You're always at risk, et cetera. But zero is that cost. And if you're a Muslim Bitcoiner, I think negative 2.5% is your risk-free rate. You're not allowed to hoard wealth like that and just put it aside. You will have to release some of that into, zakat and the poor in this case. So that's the rate you need to beat in Islamic capital markets, I think, is a nominal negative 2.5% rate. But because if you put it to work and you invest it in somebody where it's not sitting as cash and is turning into tools that we can use to produce other things and advancing civilization and technologies, then you're getting some return from that isn't necessarily measured nominally, but is a real improvement on your life.
Still a good investment because it's better than the negative 2.5. I kind of what you mean.
That is true, although, depending on how you phrase it, it can be interpreted incorrectly. But essentially, yes. So if you just do nothing with your wealth, you need to release 2.5% of that out. You're ordered to regardless, and it's risky for you not to do that. And we agree on that. If you give that to an entrepreneur, say a young kid coming out of college, and you're taking a risk on him, if he does something with it and only returns the money back to you, you've beat your rate of return, and you've actually contributed to society by enabling that young entrepreneur to do something productive.
Is the way that it fluctuates in a much more visible capacity as opposed to the U.S. dollar, which is considered stable, even though it's consistently with inflation losing its value. So whenever we're trying to present the idea of investing in Bitcoin in the Muslim community, how could you kind of explain to, how can we make it more digestible to people who are just like, oh, well, Bitcoin just dropped by like $20,000. I told you it was a bad investment. Like they have that kind of mentality. How can we kind of, cross that hurdle?
So I'll take that two different ways. So one is getting into Bitcoin itself, which is volatile, turning, you work, you earn dollars, you turn those dollars into Bitcoin. That's saving in my mind. That is not investing. And the volatility, as was being discussed earlier, is just the price of entry. But if you want to play in this revolutionary event that is happening with the monetization of a new asset, you have to kind of put up with the volatility. I mean, I'm assuming we're all privileged to be able to put some money into Bitcoin. Not everybody in the world may be, right? They may not have the disposable income and the savings where it might make sense for them to do so. So I wouldn't advise somebody, that is paycheck to paycheck, has liabilities that they need to pay out in dollars, like rent and food for their family, et cetera, to just YOLO that into Bitcoin and then, pray for the best. I don't think that would be prudent at all. The second part of this is Bitcoin's volatility also makes it very difficult to invest in any business that is not going to return Bitcoin revenues. So like Bitcoin mining has a Bitcoin denominated revenue back, and you can kind of equate to both sides of what you're putting in as an investment and your expected returns and your calculation to come up with something that makes sense to do. As Bitcoin gets adopted and the volatility kind of goes away, it will become easier to, I think, invest Bitcoin into what I'll call real businesses as opposed to Bitcoin infrastructure businesses, because the volatility will have gone away. Let's say we reach an annual growth of 15% in dollar terms, then it might make sense to open up a coffee shop that you think is going to outperform that and have that operate on a Bitcoin standard.
Any other questions for Brother Seha?
Consultant. Can you kind of explain what you do on a daily basis and how you help Muslims or how Muslims can benefit from what you're doing?
I don't know if the answer is going to satisfy you, but I'm a risk consultant primarily for large financial institutions. So financial institutions, as a result of some of the problems with Riba money, face a lot of risk when they give out loans or take on certain positions or encounter market risk in the form of options, et cetera. And all of that takes a lot of effort, systems, models, methodologies, and regulation to keep under control and keep the system sort of running without experiencing the kind of collapses that we see from time to time. So it's a way to put seatbelts on a system that I think we understand isn't sustainable in the long run, and to keep the system running essentially.
All right.
Cool.
Zakat on Bitcoin.
The sheikh's not here, so I'm not going to answer that. I pay zakat on my Bitcoin, just 1/40th.
We treat it just like cash. So if you've held it for full year, you pay 2.5% on whatever the value is.
Well,
And alhamdulillah.
and it's just the Bitcoin amount that you've held, I think, for the past year. So you don't need to worry about the dollar conversion. If you had one Bitcoin for a full year, that's the zakatable sort of wealth that I consider.
Yeah, and people have both, folks have two standards, and it really depends on their personal unit of account. If you use Bitcoin as your unit of account and you have one Bitcoin, you're going to pay 0.025 Bitcoin in zakat. If your personal unit of account is the US dollar, you might measure the value of your total Bitcoin in dollars and then pay 2.5% of that, right? So I think each approach has been validated. Ultimately, it depends on your personal unit of account. Another thing I'd highlight there is at the Bitcoin Majlis, the last 3 years, we've raised zakat in Bitcoin for an orphanage in Uganda in Africa. And alhamdulillah, with the price of Bitcoin going up each year, we've been able to donate more and more Bitcoin to this orphanage, such that they've been able to expand their capacity to well beyond 100 children at this point, alhamdulillah. So it's just another way that we're able to get direct help to people who really need it. We don't need to go through organizations necessarily that have overhead that are still doing great work, but this way we can get maximum benefit from our direct zakat.